Good afternoon, everybody, and a warm welcome again as we come back for the final part of this meeting. We're reconvening from yesterday. What we're doing is we're going to go straight on to item number 22 on your agenda. It's pages 518 to 527, and the motion considered by Council towards a diverse and inclusive council. So just give you a minute to get your papers. It's item 22, and Mr. Moody will summarise the report and the recommendations contained. Thank you, Mr. Moody.
Thank you very much, Provost. And I think members will recall that this report comes on the back of the motion that was considered at a special meeting of the Council a few weeks ago. And the outcome of that consideration was to ask officers to go away and look and see what of the action points which were suggested within the motion were already covered within Council policy relating to equality and diversity. And you'll see from the report that probably the main outcome of that is the statement that the principal policy within the Council, our equal opportunities policy, is largely directed to employees rather than to the role of elected members. But rather, I think, than just leave it at that, the report attempts to set out the broader equalities duties which lie upon the Council. And helpfully, I think the recently revised Code of Conduct that we referred to at the beginning of the meeting yesterday helps to reinforce that the duties which lie upon the Council as a corporate body also lie personally on individual members through the Code. And that's in particular in relation to the commitments which members are asked to make in relation to the promotion of the public sector equality duty. Beyond that, the report goes in to look at each of the 8 action points which were part of the motion which was submitted to the Council, and to provide some information on those, on practical issues of implementation, or where there would be any other implication to adopting the proposals within the motion. One maybe to draw your attention to is in relation to champions. The motion referred to a young people's champion, and the report indicates that there is a role at present unfilled within our existing policy for inequality and human rights champion, so it draws that to the Council's attention in addition to the young people's champion referred to in the motion. So other than that, Provost, I don't propose to say anything else. The report provides background information for the Council against which it can now turn to consider the motion which has been submitted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moody. Are we going to Councillor Murtagh, who moved the original motion? Thank you, Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Provost. And like the motion yesterday, I don't wish to go over old ground because I believe that what was brought forward during the motion in November was a detailed and reasoned explanation of why we needed to be committing as a council to do what is within our power to move towards a more diverse and inclusive council. Though it is only one small part of the overall motion that I'll shortly again move, I wanted to start with this nonetheless. Because action point 7 states to be leaders by example, embodying in conduct and language during all meetings, public and private, the welcoming and respectful environment that Falkirk Council considers critical between other elected members, officers, staff and public over and above legal minimum standards. Not that anything in this motion should cause division, but to be honest, I thought that this statement should be the least controversial of the recommendations. These are simply the standards of civility in public life, something which the updated Code of Conduct that Colin just mentioned, and indeed the old code are based on. So those are duty, selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability and stewardship, openness, honesty, leadership and respect. You don't really need to have that much of a long memory. In fact, 24 hours will probably do to see that if this is something we already do aspire to, as is our duty as elected members, we are not really knocking it out of the park in terms of demonstrating it. We might not always have a scoreline of 6-0 or even 4-1 against when it comes to that, but it's been at sometimes difficult to find meetings where we are collectively even achieving a no-score draw. And that does put people off from standing and becoming part of elected life. Because unjustified though it may be, and I believe it is, given how hard members work across this entire chamber, the hours that are put in and how seriously we take the crucial responsibilities we have, the image that is projected by meetings like yesterday doesn't fit with that. And I think it does none of us credit collectively if we allow that to be the view of how the public sees us. As I say, I didn't actually anticipate talking at all about that part of the motion, but I was embarrassed by some of the discourse yesterday and the subsequent comments from the public. And I think it's something I'm glad has been highlighted within the motion, and I hope members will agree to reaffirm this today. It's well established that if people cannot see themselves reflected or fitting in the culture of an institution, they will be more reluctant to put themselves forward, even if they believe it does need change. And I don't think we need outside agencies to tell us that something does need badly changed in local government as a whole, and that includes Falkirk. I spoke extensively last time round on the need for greater diversity in politics in general, and particularly in local government, and how important it is to represent that topic accurately and responsibly. So I just want to again clarify that this is not about any kind of tick box exercise or trying to bring some fluffy, woolly, idealised notion of diversity and equality that we can then just ignore. This is about the fundamental principle that we achieve better decisions which are more representative and therefore more relevant to the constituents which we all serve if we have a more representative democracy model. And that means having elected members around the table that reflect the richness of our communities too. There are no quick answers to that, and unconscious bias training will help meantime, and it is essential to revisit that periodically too, but it is a poor substitute for proper representation. For nothing about us without us. Underrepresented groups must have a seat at the decision-making table with a voice to be equally heard and valued alongside others. Like the climate change topic we debated yesterday, of course we cannot solve the lack of diversity in local government as a whole by words or even actions here in Falkirk Council, but that doesn't mean we should do nothing or engage in whataboutery that only leads to further inaction and finger pointing. We should be doing everything possible we can within the sphere we are in, and that is what this motion was designed to do by identifying some practical measures we could take forward and the initiatives and work of others which we could support. I was sad that it was bumped, and I felt that it was not given the time, again with the other motion on that agenda, that it deserved as a serious standalone item and not one that would be inevitably somewhat lost in a massive full council report, nor that further pressures be put on officers to bring back such a report. I'm glad, however, that the report which has come forward clearly demonstrates the competence and need for the measures asked for in the action points of the original motion. I thank officers for the work they have done, and accordingly, as Colin mentioned, given that one additional suggestion has been put forward in the report which fits the motion, and in order to avoid future duplication of work for officers in this regard, I'm happy to add an action point within the motion. This is in view of the existing Equalities Champion position which has remained unfilled, which is detailed in the Council's Equal Opportunities Policy. It suggested that it be widened to the title of Equalities and Human Rights Champion, and I think that's a welcome suggestion. And in order to ensure that this position can be properly scoped out and filled at the same time as Young People's Champion, I'm happy to move for its inclusion. It's clear from the report that the equalities duty applies to every function of council, and that does include the decision-making functions and policies, practices of the council. The practical measures, such as giving more prominence to the availability of APIAs in reports, with a clear link highlighted and available to elected members to consider ahead of decision-making, are important and will help elected members to give better scrutiny and consideration of these matters while executing our legal duties under the Equalities Act and decision-making. I'd also like to add one small addition to point 6 of the motion, which refers to the COSLA cross-party working group on removing barriers to the election of underrepresented groups to local government, and indeed finding ways to retain them once they're elected, as many leave for a variety of reasons after just one term. I was disappointed that some opposition members hinted at this motion being brought for political motives last time round, and indeed I referred to the cross-party work of members of all groups and none in my summing up. So I again wholeheartedly praise the work of COSLA President Alison Everson, a Labour member, and found her recent evidence to Scottish Parliament Committee on Local Government on this topic to be absolutely spot on and very necessary. If you haven't watched that evidence session, I would recommend that you do. I thank her for using her platform to say the things which many of us believe need saying, and I hope that we as a council can support their work. It isn't a criticism of officers, merely an acknowledgement of the fast-moving and many-layered topics in this work, that there are some omissions from this report in terms of that work, and I'm accordingly suggesting that we invite COSLA President Alison Everson to brief members on what that contains. Alison has indicated that she would be very happy to make the time to do so if diaries allow, and I thank her for her supportive words whenever we speak on these matters. It must truly be a collective effort. I hope that this demonstrates the commitment of the administration in bringing forward this motion in a non-partisan way, but instead in the spirit of making progress towards a truly diverse and inclusive council, which will benefit all our constituents, the quality of decision making, and I dare to hope the tone and constructive environment of meetings to come. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much for the very well presented your motion. Have you got a seconder?
I've second, Provost.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll go to Councillor Bissett, leader of the Labour Group, to find out if he's got any amendments.
Okay, no amendment, Provost. The reason we just asked for it to go back, we didn't disagree with it. We just wanted it to go back to see if there was maybe some of the aspects of it already within the council policy. Clearly, the council policy is tended to be directed, as Colin says, to employees. So, and a lot of the updated code of conduct, there's quite a bit of that. What Councillor Murtagh puts forward is in the code of conduct, which I'm sure we'll all welcome and read and study. And I certainly agree that collectively, every party should be complying with these rules and being as respectful as we can to one another and as comradely as we can to one another. And certainly within the Labour Party, we welcome anyone from any background into the party. So anybody with any disability or ethnic background, whatever, they're welcome to come into the party. And I do welcome the thought that we do need change and we need different people into the council. And we'll see how that develops over the coming term for where people are going to be selected again. But we do need change, and we certainly need to move forward collectively, and we're all part of that. And we should refrain from perhaps making sort of sarcastic comments, and just generally the tone needs to change, and we need to try and refrain from that. And if somebody kind of baits you a wee bit, maybe it's better just not to take the bait, I guess, and just sit back and leave it at that. So I thank Councillor Murtagh for this, and we certainly welcome it. And I certainly welcome the work that Alison Ellison's done. I know she's done a great deal of work on this, and I would welcome any meeting that we have with her. She's certainly very articulate on equalities and diversity. So I thank Councillor Murtagh for this, and I sincerely hope we can move forward collectively on this. Thank you.
Thank you for your input there, Councillor Bissett. I'll go to Councillor Kerr in relation to the thoughts of your group on this notice of motion. Councillor Kerr.
We haven't got an amendment, Provost. We understand how passionate Councillor Murtagh is regarding this issue, and we feel the same. What we didn't want to happen is debate, because debate's good for this chamber, but debate in the right manner is always the best way. we think that we had a long look at it, and we thought that most of the things that Councillor Murtagh was bringing forward was included in council's papers, but as Colin has already alluded, it only alludes to staff and no to elected members. But we welcome it, Provost, and I just hope that everybody, and this is for every group, remembers what we're signing up to here. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Provost.
No, thank you for your input. I think yeah, that everybody's speaking correctly here in relation to the issues that come forward in the agenda. I think everybody will realise that we find that the topic on the item seems to get lost in the midst of other areas, and we should be concentrating more on the specific item. I think Councillor McCluckie wanted to come in.
Thanks, Provost. I would like to say that's one of the best speeches I've heard in my 15 years of being a councillor. It was for the heart, and I know she means every word. And it was good to hear. And it does set you back because, you know, sometimes we're here for political reasons, and sometimes we make comments, and people know that, you know, 5 minutes after the meeting, where we've said something rude to somebody in a meeting, we're laughing and joking and apologising to the person, you know, because the meeting's over. But we forget that there's public perception and a whole host of diverse people out there, and that's where we find ourselves now that, as I say, we're online. So we need to take regard to these things, and I certainly will take it in the manner it deserves. I think what doesn't help sometimes, and one issue that Laura was kind of straying onto there was when we're talking about diverse people coming on to politics, is sometimes about the whip decisions. We hear, you know, complex arguments in our groups, but obviously, and maybe that's something that the parties need to look at, and would maybe better for the public, where, you know, there's less whip votes and you say what you actually believe, you know, and speak for the heart, everybody, and maybe it would be appreciated, a better understanding of it. But we are in the politics arena, and we're laid down by parties and standing orders. Thank you.
Okay, some wise words there for Councillor McCluckie. We've got a motion moved and seconded. It seems to be general agreement, but there's one or two other people want to come in at this stage. Who have we got there? But you coming? I'm coming back to you, Councillor Murtagh. Councillor Alexander, then. You're mute, Councillor Alexander.
I say something rude about the technology. The just a quick comment, Provost. What I agree with everything that's been said so far. We should try and extend it to those who want to be a councillor, and to encourage them in the manner in which they do their campaigning. Some of the stuff on social media, like yesterday, last night, was an absolute disgrace. And I hope that it's looked upon, and hopefully it's condemned by those who have responsibility for coordinating the political parties on a local basis.
Thanks, Councillor Alexander. I can't comment on what you've seen because I don't go on social media exactly for what you said. We'll go back to Councillor Murtagh now. As you say, Councillor Murtagh, we've got cross-party agreement for your notice of motion, and have you got a comment to say before we wind up? Thank you.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, I'm very grateful to members for the spirit in which they've engaged with the motion. And I think there would just be the point that although I agree that what's been said about that the Equalities Act has been mostly directed towards staff, it is very clear in the report also in point 3.1 that this duty applies to every function of council, and so clearly applies to the decision-making functions, but also it does list the conduct of elected members. I would completely agree with Councillor Alexander and his comments. I also probably try to avoid social media these days much more than what I previously did for similar reasons. But I think the point is that we are leaders. We have to project the image, and if we are not doing that, then we can't point fingers at the public, or we can't expect that. We have to embody it, and that goes from every level of politics, whether you're the Prime Minister, the First Minister, or ourselves or our activists. So I totally agree. One thing, and I just do want to pick up on this, is that yes, a lot of these things are contained within standards. They're contained within our current policies. The point I suppose I was making is that we don't embody them. We don't demonstrate it as often as we should, perhaps. And I, include self-reflection on that as well. And that although there is standards, how many of us really do take things to standards? How many of us could sit through meetings and count the number of times that a standards infringement has happened, or the number of things that have been said to us, which could quite easily result in a standards report? That system doesn't work. The punishment system doesn't work in the way that it is a deterrent. So it is on us to take that onus. And that's why I brought the motion in general, because it's not enough to point to that side of things. So I really do welcome the cross-party agreement on that, and very much, Councillor McCluskey, I assure you, couldn't quite get in 8 minutes all the things I would like to change about local government. I'm sure we could discuss that at greater length. There's many things I think which could be improved upon, but this is an important one nonetheless. So let's hope that this spirit of cooperation continues for the rest of the meeting, and that tone we can all live in hope. Thanks, Provost.
No, thank you for that. So we're agreed the recommendations contained within the report. Everybody agree to that?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. That takes us to item 24. Before we go back, we've already did 23, the execution of deeds. 24 is the motion, and it's adaptations to housing, and it's been brought forward by Councillor Alison Black. Councillor Black.
Thanks very much, Provost. I hope this motion will get approval from all the elected members, as I'm sure each of us can remember where a constituent has been impacted due to requiring a stair lift or some other adaptation. And we have a great team of social workers, work staff and OTs. They have good people skills and they really do an excellent job. But my concerns aren't so much about the assessment process, but maybe more about what happens and the potential repercussions after the initial assessment is done. And we all know it's much better for people to be able to stay in their own homes for as long as possible. It's safer and much better for their physical health and also for their mental well-being. And as people live longer, they do need more help to stay at home, and that help can become costly. And sometimes it's not possible to adapt a property due to the physical characteristics that are within that home. However, on occasions, a home can be assessed as being able to take a stair lift. As an example, however, outside of the, I'm using stair lifts as an example, but there's been other issues with like walk-in showers, etc., or something similar to a walk-in shower. So somebody's been assessed as being okay, they can have a stair lift, but they have to have an assessment to see if they can have a ramp. And if the ramp cannot be built, then the person is told that they can't have a stair lift and they'll need to move home. And this is because the council wants to make sure that, I suppose it's best value and it's going to be future-proofed as much as possible, so that meeting that person's needs long-term. But can you imagine what a heartache that is to someone who's lived in a property for many years? It's where their memories are, where they feel safe, and it's very familiar to them. Yet down the street in a very similar property, if not exactly the same type of property, someone else has got a stair lift and they have steps going into their house and they don't have a ramp. So the person who's refused then has to consider their options, and we all know that moving home isn't easy. We all know how long the council waiting lists are, and we also know the pressure that's on that the allocations lists are under, and the staff working in that department. And there is a shortage of properties suitable for older people. And I know that the IGB is addressing that with their house and needs assessment, etc. And we're looking at that, but it's a long-term solution. We're looking at currently we do have a shortage of older people's housing. So where does that leave the person needing the stair lift? Because just one example is they might have really bad arthritic hips. They might not be in a position where they're able to have an operation, so they're living at home, while they wait to try and find a property that's suitable. And we all know that there's a big shortage of them. So what happens to that person? Because their mobility gets worse, the pain that they're in gets worse, and the whole situation becomes really quite desperate. So that person's probably got a maxillarium. They'll probably in the future they might in the future have a wheelchair, who knows? But if they go outdoors, and then ideally it would be good to have a ramp. But we all know people who live in properties that are far from ideal, but they manage with help from their family, from their friends, from their carers, and for MECs when necessary. So why they need to put in a ramp so you can have a stair lift? When I queried this recently, the person was reassessed, and that person now has a stair lift and doesn't have a ramp, and they do have a couple of wee steps going up into their house. And I've chatted to our head of housing and to our head of integration about this, and I'm sure that after I review the current policy, measures can be put in place that will mean that people can stay in their own home for longer, whilst ensuring that their medical conditions don't deteriorate, because that is so important, and at the same time less pressure is put on our allocations list. So I hope that we can collectively agree to put this motion forward and see what the staff can come up with in the terms of a review. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Black. Have we got a seconder for the motion? Councillor Colley? Are you seconding the motion?
I would be really happy to, in the spirit of consensus, I would be really happy to second this motion. I think that consistency is important, and I think if there are indications that decisions are made that are not consistent, then I think we need to investigate that and trying to make sure that we are able to have a system that is applied equally. I know I kind of had this idea that anybody with stairs could have a stair lift, and I was quickly made aware that that wasn't always the case. That sometimes obviously the building wasn't suitable, and sometimes it was around the individual's physical abilities, and obviously it needs to be safe, and the council has to make decisions that are safe. But I think it would be a positive move forward just to have a look and just make sure that there is a consistency across the piece for all people, not just for older people, but for children with disabilities as well. And I suppose my only question is around the time scale, and I think I just would want to have some confidence from some reassurance from Patricia and our team that the timescale is feasible for them, just in light of the current challenges and the challenges that staff are facing right now. I suppose that's my only question on it.
Okay, thank you very much for your input there. Patricia, we'll bring you in now if you can maybe respond to that concern. It is really more than a question from Councillor Colley about timescales. Is Patricia there? Or Martin?
Sorry, I was on mute, Provost.
No.
Thank you. We have actually started the review, and I think it's critical. It does involve Kenny Gillespie and the housing team, because it needs to be obviously a whole system approach across not just the adaptations but the provision of adapted housing. So some work has already started on that. In terms of the system's pressures, sorry, Councillor Black, can you remind me what the time frame is?
A report was to come back to Council in March.
I would ask if we could bring that back after the spring, just to give us enough time to complete the review given the current pressures that we're under within the system. And we've already got a couple of other reviews, the joint loan equipment store piece of work, for example, that is underway at the moment. So I would appreciate it if we could put it back to May or June. I think it'd be a more realistic time frame for that to come back through. Thank you.
What do you think about that, Councillor Black?
Promise, can I just ask what our group leader has to say about it, Councillor Bissett, just to clarify with him? Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks,
Councillor
Mayor.
Bissett.
I would
Yep.
prefer that the report comes back as sooner rather than later, so preferably March.
Okay. Right. Okay, so we've got a response for the for Patricia saying that she'd prefer it to come back because of the timescales. What you're saying is that you want to well, I'll come back to the mover of the motion, Councillor Black. Councillor Black, you're saying that you're still, because of what you've heard for your group leader, you're still intimating that you want it back for March.
Would it be possible, would it be feasible, Robert, to have it back before the end of this term, at the end of April? Would that be okay?
I think that would be fine, Councillor Black.
Okay, so we're talking about the end. I'll come back to your seconder, Councillor Black. Sorry about this to and fro. Councillor Colley, you've heard the discussion. We're talking about the possibility of bringing it back at the end of April. Would you be happy with that?
I think I would defer to Patricia if she feels
Right.
that's feasible. Then I would be happy to support that. I think March does seem too early, but if we were talking the end of April, then maybe that would be feasible.
Right. Okay, we'll go back to Patricia then. Patricia, you're hearing what's being said. The end of April, would that give you a wee bit more comfort?
Thank you, Provost. I wouldn't normally ask for more time to do this piece of work. I think what we'll need to do is go away with the board and review other things that are on the books, because we are just under such sustained pressure at the moment that we're focusing a lot of our staff on frontline delivery and not got a great deal of capacity for this type of work. We've already got some reviews underway, so it'll need to be at the expense perhaps of another piece of work, but we could endeavour to do that for April on that basis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. We've got three waiting to come in, but before they come in, I'm going to come back to yourself, Patricia, because adaptations have been a long-standing issue with councillors since I've been on the council. One of the major problems hasn't been the fact is that the properties they're in, that there was also had completely been said to all members that all the years that I've been a councillor, that one of the problems was for the length of time that people were waiting was because of the finance. And I'm just wondering if things have changed over the years, that's no really an excuse now for people waiting for considerable times.
I'm not aware that that is a reason. We did, with housing
Right.
colleagues, do quite a focused piece of work over the last 2 years to reduce the waiting. We've also reduced waiting times more generally for aids through the Living Well Falkirk website, which has then released capacity for those larger demands for larger pieces of equipment. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'll bring in Councillor Meikle-John, Councillor McCluskey, then Councillor Goldie. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Provost. It was just to express a concern. I appreciate Patricia has been very pragmatic and saying April, but knowing that the work that's ongoing within the IHIB right now, I'm really concerned that some of the other items are going to be impacted because there's a huge amount of work ongoing right now, and at the same time we've got masses of pressures on our staff, including the circumstances we're in just now, where staff are non-frontline staff are having to support our frontline staff, and I suspect that's probably going to be ongoing, and only by March time will we start to hopefully, and I'm saying that hopefully, start to see that start to lift a little bit. But I'm really concerned about some of the other work that's ongoing, particularly in relation to our best value report, is now going to have to be rescheduled as a result of this. I would have thought certainly May or June would have been far more appropriate times for it to be able to report back, and just giving the service that little bit of time to do the job properly, rather than put pressure elsewhere. So I just really I want to have that recorded, Provost.
Before I bring in the rest of the councillors, including Councillor Colley, hand up again, I'm going to refer us to Mr Moody. Mr Moody.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I thought it was helpful maybe to remind Council that there are no scheduled meetings in April. It's the pre-election period for that month running up to the election. So if we are talking about a meeting of Council prior to the election, then that would be the Council that's already fixed towards the end of March. So I think the pressure that may bring to bear on the partnership staff is something that would need to be borne in mind in the context of your consideration. I think it's also maybe worth just pointing out that the motion is really talking about two levels of reporting back. First to the Council to consider the outcome of the review, and then to allow the Council to make any recommendation to a future IGB. The motion refers to the March meeting of the IGB, but I think it's plain from discussion among all members that there's now no expectation of such a report back to the March IGB. So I think the question perhaps for discussion at this stage is the practicality of reporting back to the Council meeting at the end of March, given that there isn't another meeting during the election period running up to the election.
Could we possibly have
Okay,
a short
then,
recess, Provost?
Pardon, you want a recess? 10 minutes?
I think that'd be helpful, Provost.
Okay, 10-minute recess. Thank you very much. Okay, then, thank you for that. Councillor Colwell, I've got your message. We're in a minute, but I'll go straight back to Councillor Black, who asked for the recess and discussion. Have you come up to any changes or agreements?
Thanks, Provost. I think it was really helpful just to have a short recess, and obviously we take everything that the Chief Officer, Mrs Cassidy, says. We take that seriously, and we know that there's a lot of important work going on, and we're grateful that the work's already started on aids and adaptations. So we wondered if it would be possible to have a brief update in March, and then have the full review completed by May or June next year. I feel that an update would be helpful.
Okay, I'll bring in Patricia on that. Patricia, I've heard what's been said. An update in March and then coming back to the report at the end of May.
Thank you, Provost. I really appreciate that concession from Councillor Black. We wouldn't normally put off any work, but it is just because of the extreme pressure, but also we want to do quite significant consultation and engagement with people who need the service or receive the service, so that whatever comes forward is based on that user experience and need. So I'd appreciate that. We can certainly provide an update in March and the full report in due course. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go back to Councillor Colley, your seconder. Councillor Colley, I've heard the changes. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I think after having heard Patricia speaking, and I think I'm very well aware of the huge pressures the team is under, and I think that as elected members, we're all very, very supportive of the work of the partnership, and I think that this shows a sensible way forward, and I don't need to put forward an amendment. I really appreciate that the within the recess that we've all had a good chat and come to a really, I think, sensible conclusion.
Okay then. I'll still come back to the two gentlemen that had their hands up. Councillor McCluskey first, and then Councillor Goldie.
Thank you, Provost. Very important item here, and so we're a bit of leeway in speaking. But I was good to hear that Kenny's team's involved here, because that's what I was going to suggest. There hasn't been any improvement in this regard. I know Patricia says that there have been some improvements. I just got an email back during the week, for example, that there's delays because the adaptation teams are inundated with work, right, that they can't deal with, which is causing the delays. People think because we're politicians that we can't get a red neck. I get totally embarrassed trying to help people, and I go in my village, my next door neighbour, and people elsewhere, where you're trying to get them a stair lift, and the people pass away before it takes that long to get the stair lift. That I can name a number of people in my own community village that's passed away before the stair lift came, or before a walk-in shower came, or because of the timescales, the adaptations. That's soul destroying to me as a caring person, let alone what that family's suffering at that time with the loss of a loved one. And we've got to take these things seriously. There's an inconsistency, as Alison has said. You know, some things you say, well, that's a housing and they can deal with it, and other, no, that's social work. Then we hear that person says they can get in the front door, okay, there's only one step. You ask for a set of handrails in the back because they fell and that gone out them. Oh no, social work's got to deal with that. And then you talk to another housing officer. What is it, a two-step or a three-step? Oh yes, we can deal with that. Is it a permanent wall? Because a bit difficult if it's been cladding and that on the outside it for fixing, and we can get that moving. So one thing's easy and gets done, another thing can take a year. It just doesn't seem right. What happens? These modifications can be simple. I've not had a bath for 3 years because the last time I took a bath, as I said, I couldn't get out it. I thought it was in the Titanic on the sink. I couldn't, and the plugs at the other end, you know, you're soaked there because I had seized up in the bath. How many people have to try to get a shower because of the difficulty, and they get afraid because they can't get out the bath or can't get in the bath? And sometimes I go to resolve with a simple wee adaptation. Takes 10 minutes to fit. Screws on the side of the bath and first screws in the flare, and you can use that to get in and out. And Ruby uses that, and the two is I got blue badges. So these are simple things that can be addressed to people while they're waiting on another thing. The other issue is obviously, and it relates to the housing side, is not everybody's got a bath, doesn't always have a shower, a overhead shower. Right. So when they get to an age that they can't do the bath, right, and they want to have the shower, right, they've no got it. But paying the same rent as 3/4 of the people who have both, right, put in by the council. We go to then people in the villages where the hot water turns off because of the price for an hour when the weans come out of school. And then you go to one officer who manages to say, oh, and for that reason, we'll put an overhead shower in because there's no hot water to bath the kids because the heating's off, right? And then you go to another officer and then they tell you, oh no, you can't get an overhead shower. They've got a bath. It is so crazy and so diverse that we need to get these situations quickly resolved, and simple things can make a huge difference to a person's quality of life, and that's what we're looking for here. A bit, movement and trying to deal with the simple things. And as I says, when you've got to get a walk-in shower, that other adaptation can go handed to somebody else, or a wee step that you can use to get in and out. These are simple things that can get done in the meantime while you're waiting the adaptation. It doesn't need an OT to tell you that if somebody's making you aware that they can't get in and out a shower or up a stair, right? That's the issues. How is it the same type of house and somebody says they can get a stair lift up that stair because most of the houses are the same, just gone the different way, but then somebody up the street gets told they can't get a shower depending on a stair lift. It just doesn't make sense. You know how many times I've went out to somebody that needed a ramp, and then they tell you can't put a ramp because of the gradient. It's quite simple. You just put the ramp along the way and then down, and then it meets the gradient. Oh, but that's extra work for the blacksmith. Right. It just depends on who you get. We're talking about people, right, getting them in home. And maybe that lady's been in that home, her man's passed away, her family's all been brought up, that's the family home, she's no one to leave it, right? And to tell, oh, you would better moving rather than getting a wee simple thing at the back door, it would be easier for you to move. The other one, and my last item, promised in a previous indulgence, is people wait 5 years to get on the housing list. They then get a house that has been, because other folk wouldn't take it, goes to the old category, and a family gets it, and there's no bath, it's a walk-in shower. And then 10 years later, you've dug up that shower 3 times because of the problems trying to stop the water going through and different other things. And the reality is the people for that 10 year, would have preferred the bath. And at times the work to try to resolve the issue when the walk-in shower, right, the obviously hangme, is cost more than putting the bath and shower in. It just doesn't make sense, as I said. So I thank you for passing this. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Provost. Indulgence.
No, Councillor McCulkey, can I say once again that a lot of what you say that resonates with members, and I was watching Patricia there and she was noting down everything you were saying. It's a difficult situation, but adaptations, and I've been a councillor like Councillor Alexander, Councillor Spears and Councillor Goldie. We've been here for well over coming up 30 years, and we've had major issues and long-term issues with adaptations over the years. Anyway, Councillor Goldie, you wanted in, sir?
Yeah, it was just very, obviously we've taken recognition of everything that's been said, but what I was going to say earlier, I'm quite sure that this situation that's been resolved, Councillor Black's amendment, if it's to be that, or the alteration, will be approved, because it would be criminal for us to put any kind of further pressure on the Health Board and the IGB at this time. It's just as simple as that. Now, I'm no one that's shy of criticising officers or putting pressure on officers to get results, but we simply can't do that at this time. It's just unthinkable. Officers are doing their best, but certainly at this time, officers in the Health Board and in the IGB are working well beyond what maybe they should be doing. They're doing a job there, and we can't put pressure on them, Provost.
Okay, then I think we're all in agreement then to the amendments to the motion. You want to clarify them, Mr. Moody, or is everybody there? Councillor Colley want to come in again?
Thank you for your indulgence, Provost. I just actually, bearing in mind this is live streamed and just to get some information out. John mentioned some things around bathing and handrails, and I just wanted to flag up the Living Well in Falkirk website and the Living Well in Falkirk service links in with the Joint Loan Equipment Service and Reach to provide a range of equipment like bathing aids, like handrails, commodes, help getting up and down from the toilet, so that sort of thing. So I think it's just to say there's a lot of stuff available that's not the traditional adaptations like a walk-in shower or a ramp. So it was just to kind of make that information, get that information out there, because we are on live stream.
Okay, thanks for that. So everybody agreed then to Councillor Black's motion with the amendments, seconded by Councillor Colley. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Okay, that takes us back to where we were in the agenda, which was item 14, proportionality of committee places. The report is by the Director of Corporate Housing Services, pages 348 to 352, but Mr. Moody will summarise the report and the recommendations contained within. Mr. Moody.
Thank you very much, Provost. And this is the first of a series of reports which look at the Council's decision-making arrangements and its general governance documents. So there are, I think, links and interdependencies between some of them. The first of these relates to, as you said, Provost, the issue of proportionality on committee places, and it asks the Council to examine the position with proportionality in light of the recent changes in the political makeup of the Council. And as all members will know, these derive from the recent by-election and also from the resignation of Councillor Goldie from the Labour group. And that has impacted on the balance on the broader council membership. The report takes you through some of the potential consequences of that, and I think the first of those relates to the two executives, the executive and the education, children and young people's executive. And what I've tried to do in this report is to set out a logical arithmetical approach to the new numbers, which are now found within the council membership and the 27 members of the council who are members of party groups. You can see that in 4.3 within the report, and where that process takes us as an endpoint to the recommendation. I'm not going to go through that in detail. I think you can see it in the report itself, but what it leads to is the recommendation that the executives are rebalanced with 6 to the SNP and 3 each to Labour and the Conservative groups. Very similar process applies in relation to the scrutiny committees, and the outcome to that again is a similar one, with 4 to the SNP, 2 to Labour and 2 to the Conservatives. The report turns then to the planning committee. It's the same size as our current executive, so with 12 members, but the council has previously agreed to allow independent representation within the planning committee. So some of the arithmetical difficulties which arise in relation to the executives don't arise in the same way for the planning committee. So it's relatively easy, I think, to apply an arithmetical proportionality of the current council membership to the planning committee, which is set out is SNP 5, Labour 3, Conservative 3 and Independent 1. The impact of that is Labour losing a place and the Conservatives gaining 1. Turning then to the issue of the licensing board and the civic licensing committee. Again, those are bodies where there is independent representation on the committees. The impact of that effectively, when the arithmetic is turned to numbers, is to maintain the 4 current SNP representation. And if you were to do it to split between the Conservative group and the Labour group, you would probably want to give them 2.5 each. As we can't do that, the suggestion here is that there's the 3-2 split is differentiated between the two bodies. And the suggestion is that we maintain the licensing board membership as it is, but change the civic licensing committee membership to give the additional place there to the Conservative group. So, Provost, those are the recommendations in relation to committees as they stand in light of the fresh political balance within the council. You'll see there is an additional section, an additional recommendation in relation to the integration joint board. This recommendation arose in light of a vacancy on a place that's currently allocated by council decision to the Labour group. The place hadn't been filled by the Labour group, and I think it was understood by me, perhaps incorrectly, that the intention was not to fill that place. But since the issuing of the agenda, the place has now been filled by the Labour group, and accordingly there's no need to consider recommendation 5. So I'll stop at that point, Provost, and I'm happy to answer questions if that would assist.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moody, for that. I'll go straight to the leader of the council, Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Provost. Hopefully this will be a very straightforward report because the numbers are as they are, having now had to reflect the changes in the membership of the council. It was agreed by majority of the council that the membership of the executives in particular should be proportional by political grouping. therefore excluding the independents. That was reaffirmed later on, and the same methodology has been applied today. And I would think that any deviation from that could be politically misinterpreted in some other way. The fact remains that the SNP have increased their numbers and remain the largest party and have taken on the role of the administration, and therefore that should be reflected in the makeup of the committee, the executive, which is the key policy making body. I'm not going to say any more on that right now, Provost, other than I'm going to move the recommendations as in the paper, recognising that the point 5 has now been negated as it has been a nomination set forward.
Okay, have you got a seconder for that, Councillor Meikle-John?
Hi, Provost. Councillor Gardner, happy to second, reserving the right.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, we'll go to Councillor Bissett. Councillor Bissett, have you got an amendment in relation to the rest recommendation?
Yes, Provost, and I'd just like to say it's myself that's going on IGB, so I look forward to working with Patricia and others and trying to take things forward. Thank you, and I'll probably realise the pressure that they are indeed under. Even I'll understand that even better. Provost, I'll just read the amendment. The amendment is that Council 1 notes the arithmetical calculations in the report and the recommendations on the political balance on committees, particularly the Executive and the Education, Children and Young People's Executive. 2, recognises that the administration remains a minority administration with 14 out of 30 members, and that it would not reflect this position to give that the administration control of the 2 executives, which are the principal decision-making bodies in the council. 3, agrees that instead of the proposed change in balance, that the executive reduce in size by 1 member, and that the party balance will be 5 SNP, 3 Labour, 3 Conservative, and 4 otherwise agrees the recommendations on political balance. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Have you got a seconder for that amendment?
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Nimmo. We're going to share it. Are we sharing it on the screen, Brian? We're going to share it on the screen just now, and I'm going to ask Councillor Meikle-John, the leader, if she wants a small recess to discuss this amendment with your group.
No, Provost, I'm quite content with the motion that we've moved.
Okay, fine, thank you. Just give you an opportunity to have a read at this. Councillor Chair, I'm coming to you just now. You've seen there's obviously in the papers the motion put forward by the leader. You've now seen an amendment coming forward from Councillor Bissett. Has your group got any further amendment?
We've not got any further amendment, but Provost, with your indulgence, I would like to speak to my colleagues for 5 minutes.
Okay, well, that's coming up for quarter past. We'll give you to 20 past. That gives you about 7 minutes.
That's fine.
Okay.
But, obviously, it's the first time we've seen this.
You've
so
seen it. Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
Provost.
Right. If you could come back for 20 past.
Right,
Thank you
okay.
very much. Okay. Thank you very much for that. We'll reconvene the meeting now. Councillor Kerr, I'll come straight to yourself for your discussions there the past few minutes. Have you any further amendment or anything you want to add to the debate so far?
No further amendment, Provost, no.
Okay. Okay then, fine. Okay, we'll just clarify where we are. We've got a motion moved and seconded, and we've got an amendment moved and seconded. Would anybody like to come into the debate before we go to the vote?
Provost, Councillor Coleman.
Councillor Coleman, yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Sorry, Provost, I'm having video issues. I just wanted to make you aware. I put a wee message in that I've got some questions and that may create a further amendment. Whichever order you want to do this in is in your hands, sir.
Well, I think have you asked the questions first, and then
It's for Mr. Moody then. It's just clarification because it seems what the Labour Party are doing is reducing the executives by one. What's the ramifications for the numbers of the other committees, Civic, Licensing Committee and Licensing Board?
My apologies, Provost, I was just coming off mute. In my view, Provost, I think there's no obvious consequence to that. The Council can make the decision as to what size each of the bodies and committees is. There's no reason why the Licensing Board or the Civic Licensing Committee needs to change size in consequence of a reduction in one by the executives.
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Mr. Moody.
is that clear enough? You're no.
It is. I think I'll leave it. No further amendment at this stage. Thank you.
Okay then. Thank you very much, sir. Okay then, we've got a motion moved and seconded. We've got an amendment moved and seconded. We'll go back to the leader if she'd like to wind up with her motion. Councillor Meikle-John.
Provost, I have my hand up, Councillor Gardner.
Sorry, Councillor Gardner, I hadn't seen you. We'll take you in straight away. Thank you, sir.
That's quite all right. If we can just run over why we are here, why we've got this report before us. It's basically down to Labour Party losing 2 members for whatever reason that's been. Obviously through the by-election, which was won by the SNP, and Emma's obviously been elected. When Pat Reid left for whatever reasons unknown to us, so I'm sure Pat had his reasons for that. And also we have Councillor Goldie, who left the party by whether it was mutual consent or not, I don't know either. I'm not privy to what happened there either. But what we're seeing here, Provost, with this amendment is nothing short of just a power grab again by Labour. And I'm not going to jump the gun in this, but being a betting man, I would put 50 pence on the Conservative group, their pals, backing them in this one. This is just a power grab, but they're doing a power grab and they're not taking any responsibility. So it's quite easy to blame the SNP administration at every single turn for decisions that we have not made, not decisions we made, and that's been quite evident yesterday and in previous meetings in the weeks and months past. Now here's a novel idea. Why doesn't Labour and their Conservative pals join together, which I'm sure they're planning to do after the election, and form the administration now? Then they would take responsibility for these decisions. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you for your contribution there. So we're going back now, Mr. Moody. We've got a motion moved and seconded. We have an amendment moved and seconded. We'll go back to Councillor Meikle-John first before we take the vote. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thanks, Provost. I don't want to say too much more because I think my colleagues probably hit the nail on the head. But this is what we've seen right the way along throughout this administration. But the opposition changing the rules to suit themselves when they feel like it. And Councillor Garner's right. This is a power grab. The Labour Party have lost 2 members, yet they still want to have the balance, and they don't want to recognise that the SNP are still the biggest party in the council. And we stepped up, we took on the administration, and they've just tried to hold the council back at every turn, every vote. And that is why we're in the position we are. I don't know if anybody had the opportunity to listen to the best value report at the Commission today. It was difficult hearing, but you could quite clearly see the directions and the implications for the council. And when you reflect and everything that we see here, it's about thwarting the SNP. It's not about corporate council. It's about own political prejudices here. So again, it beggars belief that we see this power grab without responsibility, just to hold the council back, fighting for the sidelines, and I truly hope the public see this, and come the next election, we'll be able to really make a difference and actually see Falkirk thrive, because right now our opposition are holding things back.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Mr Moody?
Thank you, Provost. The motion is moved by Councillor Meiklejohn and seconded by Councillor Garner, and consists of the recommendations in paragraph 2 of the report, against which there is an amendment which has been displayed and circulated, moved by Councillor Bissett and seconded by Councillor Nimmo. Provost Buchanan.
Amendment.
Deputy Provost Ritchie.
Motion.
Councillor Aitchison.
Amendment.
Councillor Alexander.
Motion.
Councillor Balfour.
The motion.
Councillor Binney.
The motion.
Councillor Bissett.
Amendment.
Councillor Black.
Amendment.
Councillor Blackwood.
Amendment.
Councillor Bowes.
Motion.
Councillor Coleman.
The motion.
Councillor Colley.
The motion.
Councillor Coombs.
The amendment. The amendment.
Councillor Flynn.
Amendment.
Councillor Garner.
Motion.
Councillor Goldie.
Motion.
Councillor Grant.
Amendment.
Councillor Harris.
The amendment.
Councillor Hughes.
The motion.
Councillor Kerr.
Amendment.
Councillor McHugh.
The motion.
Councillor McCluckie.
Amendment.
Councillor Meiklejohn.
The motion.
Councillor Monroe.
The motion. The amendment.
Councillor Murtagh.
The motion.
Councillor Nicholl.
The amendment.
Councillor Nimmo.
Amendment.
Councillor Patrick.
The amendment.
Councillor Russell.
The motion.
And Councillor Spears.
The motion.
Hold the lines.
Province, there are 15 votes for the motion. There are 15 votes for the amendment. There is accordingly an equality of votes, and you as Provost have a second or casting vote.
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to negate my responsibility for any item on any agenda, and I will just go with my original vote, which was for the amendment.
Provost, that's the question.
Accordingly, Provost, the amendment is carried.
That's the question.
Okay, thank you very much. That takes us to item 15
Provost,
on your
Councillor Alexander's trying to ask a
agendas this
question.
morning. It's standing orders.
You're going to ignore the fact there's a request for a question to be answered.
I can't hear. Sorry, somebody got a question? Who's got the question? Carry on.
3. Question is, that's giving you 2 votes. Is it non-aligned independent or is it an aligned independent? Can you clarify which one of these 2 you are?
I'm an independent. I'm not aligned to any party. Thank you.
So you're an non-aligned independent.
I'm an independent councillor and have been, and I'm not aligned to any party. Thank you.
No, so
Okay,
it's
that's item.
just coincidence that you have never voted with the SNP, not once since 2005.
Well, I think we're going to item 15, which is standing orders review, and it's Colin Moody will summarise the report and the recommendations. It's pages 353 to 435 on your agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Provost. And this report was undertaken following the indication given at your June meeting that there was a proposal to review and consider standing orders, taking into account 3 principal areas. First of all was any lessons learned in relation to virtual meetings, anything that might have arisen from the planning review, and anything that required to be done in light of the revised code of conduct. And the opportunity was also taken just more generally to have a look at the operation of the standing orders, and was there anything which could be made clearer or more effective in terms of decision making. And in light of that, Provost, there are recommendations, I think, that fall within three broad areas. Firstly, in relation to virtual and remote meetings, or virtual, I should say, and blended meetings, more broadly within the standing orders, and then lastly, in relation to particular issues arising in planning. So if I might begin, first of all, in relation to virtual meetings. There is at the end of the papers within the report as Appendix 2 to the report a proposed virtual meeting protocol. And I'll comment just briefly on why it is a protocol. I think this is an emerging situation. We don't know how long we will continue to have remote meetings or whether we will move permanently to have blended meetings at some point. So rather than enshrine any changes within the body of the standing orders, they are sitting outside in a protocol in a way that can be revised and adapted more easily as we move forward. And it's conceivable we may learn lessons further from our meetings, and this gives a greater opportunity to keep the protocol under review. So, in relation to the protocol itself, there are some practical issues covered in the protocol, but I think the issues of substance, perhaps to summarise them, are in relation to visibility, which is around keeping the camera on to show that you're participating in the meeting. There are provisions for where a member has declared an interest and requires to leave the meeting. Those are reflective of the guidance from the Standards Commission, which is why they are as they are. And there are also proposals in relation to just some caution around symbols and backgrounds when members are on remote meetings. And lastly, there are provisions made in relation to voting and what the expectations will be if someone is having some difficulty with connection during the voting process. Turning to the body of the standing orders themselves, there are some of the changes which are really little more than, I think, clarification and try to reflect what better reflects our practice. There is, however, one change of, I think, significance, which is proposed and which I want to draw to your attention, and that's the change in Standing Order 20 in relation to advance notice for motions and amendments. It's maybe worth at this point as well, Provost, reminding people that with papers that were issued with the agenda, there is an additional copy of the standing orders with tracked changes of the proposed changes, which may be easier to read for members. But to summarise the proposal in relation to Standing Order 20, effectively it says that if the motion to be moved by the administration at a council, an executive, or an education, children and young people's executive is different from the recommendations, then advance notice is to be given of that to allow the other members of the council or the committees in question to know what is being moved. And the corollary of that is that where the opposition groups or those not in groups in relation to the council are proposing to make an amendment, that advance notice be given of the amendment, and there are proposed timescales in relation to that. There are also provisions to allow those motions or amendments, notice of which have been given, to be adjusted during the course of the meeting. I think that's the right thing to do. If there is advance notice, it gives an opportunity for advice, an opportunity for discussion, an opportunity for reconsideration, and the ability to change a motion or amendment is a way to reflect that anticipated benefit. There is scope for an amendment to emerge during the course of the meeting itself, which no notice has been given, but only where there is the unanimous consent of the meeting. So, Provost, that's the broad shape of the proposal, and I think that is probably the most significant proposal within the standing order revisals. Turning to the issue of the changes around the planning and regulatory committees more generally. The first of these is the suggestion that we no longer have deputations at those committees. Typically, that means deputations at the planning committee. And the reason for that is to attempt to ensure a balanced presentation of the issues before the committee. I think it won't be unknown to members of that committee or those who recall considering planning applications at the council when the council had that role in relation to major applications, where it would often be the case or sometimes be the case that the developer may be represented but not any of the objectors, or vice versa. It could be an objector's position being put forward with no balancing deputation from the developer. And that is the root of the proposal in relation to the removal of deputations. At 4.6, I refer to further proposal, which I think we don't have much choice in relation to because it derives from the new version of the code. And that is around the removal of the ability of elected members who are not members of the planning committee to appear to speak at the committee. And the reason for that being caught by the code is the code does not allow members to take advantage of a process to appear in front of such a committee where that wouldn't be open to members of the public. And that is a right in our standing orders at present that only lies with elected members. So accordingly, that really can't survive the new code. Provost, this is maybe a relatively brief summary of some of the there are other implications within the revised standing orders, but perhaps some of them are of greater detail. I'm happy to answer questions on those if that would assist. There has been some engagement prior to this meeting with a range of groups across the council that assisted in at least explaining the thinking behind the proposals. Otherwise, I am happy to answer questions, Provost.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moody. Obviously, you took a few minutes to give us an overview of the changes that we've got to consider, and it's going to be very interesting to find out what the groups are saying in relation to the recommendations. I'll go straight to the Leader of the Council, Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Provost. Our standing orders are the framework we use to govern how we operate in our decision making. With the updated code and the changes coming through in relation to planning, which have to be made, there's an opportunity being taken to look at some minor changes within standing orders, leaving any major change to the new council after the May elections. Having given consideration to the proposals in the paper, there are a number that we do not feel are appropriate to take forward just at this time. In particular, 4.3, the prior notice of amendments and motions. The principle of sharing information beforehand in order to facilitate more collaborative working across the council and to aid better decision making is something that would be welcome. There would need to be greater thought about how that might work in practice and any unintended consequences that could prevent the ability to react and be influenced by debate. Therefore, it really would need to be given further thought and brought back, as it would potentially negate the need for any debate if predetermined positions were brought before us. Would not agree to 4.5 and the removal of deputations, particularly in planning and moving to a hearing system. Well, this move may be viewed in a way of giving equal opportunity to developers and applicants. the developers already have an advantage over communities, and therefore the objectors don't necessarily have the same access to professional legal representation as individuals of the community, and therefore believe this is important to acknowledge, and having the ability to make direct representation to the committee is important. Well, it is not a full review. There is an opportunity to look at some minor changes and updates in standing orders, making them more current and meaningful. The first being dispensing with the need to stand when speaking, recognising that not everyone has mobility that enables them to do that, as in 17.3. I'm sure that many would appreciate that, and perhaps it's outdated and archaic in a modern way of working. And at 27.2, it would be helpful to bring that up to date around what could be considered inflammatory language, including that which could relate to protected characteristics. So it's particularly important as meetings are live streamed and members are under far more public scrutiny than ever before. There's also an opportunity, I believe, to look at 30.2 around the financial aspects of things, and perhaps consideration could be given by Mr Moody to ensuring that any proposals that are brought forward as part of a motion are fully costed and identified where the funding is coming from. But I appreciate that may require some further thought. Finally, recognising the impacts of the pandemic is still very much with us and will be a need to continue virtual meetings for some time to come. So I need to ensure good practice as much as can be related in the same way as physical meetings. Therefore, I would agree to the protocol for virtual meetings. This would ensure that we continue in a professional manner, as often virtual meetings can become a little bit more informal, and we lose some of the business nature of it. So I'm going to therefore move the following amendment, Provost, and I do believe that officers have a copy of this to be able to share. Council therefore agrees to adopt the revised standing orders as appended to the report, subject to the following alterations. 1. Do not agree the changes to standing orders 20 and 38.1 regarding the advance notice of motions as set out in section 4.3 of the report, and to maintain the status quo, and request that the Chief Governance Officer consults with group leaders on the potential changes to the provisions of motions to be reported to a future meeting. 2. Do not agree the changes to standing order 38.1 regarding the removal of deputations from regulatory bodies as set out in section 4.5 of the report, and maintain the status quo. 2. Additionally agrees the following amendments to standing orders. First one is to amend standing order 17.3 to remove the presumption of standing to address the Provost. The provision will be replaced with when the Provost rises to speak, or any councillor then speaking will desist. And further one is to amend standing order 27.2 to read, in the event of persistent misconduct of a councillor by disregarding the ruling of the Provost, or behaving improperly or offensively, or using language that could be considered degrading or offensive, to include but not limited to comments which are degrading or offensive in relation to protected characteristics, or willfully obstructing the business of the meeting, the Provost may take any of the following courses of action, either separately or in sequence. And finally is to agree to the virtual meetings protocol appended in the report. But I would ask that maybe further consideration be given around the moving of motions that have a financial implication, and ensuring that these actually are able to be addressed with saying where the funding should come from. I therefore move the amendment, the motion, Provost.
Okay, thank you. We've got a seconder, Councillor Garner, you seconding?
Hi, Provost. Yes, I'm happy to send.
Okay, thank you. I'll go straight to Councillor Bissett, but we're getting that put up in line, I believe, at the moment. We're getting an email as well, Brian? It's been emailed as well to you. Councillor Bissett, just as this is coming through, have you got an amendment to the recommendations?
Not at the minute, Provost, but will we like a short recess?
Yes, I think we'll all need a recess. Well, I think 15 minutes will be adequate.
Thank you, Provost.
Okay, and Councillor Kerr, have you anything to say at this stage, or are you waiting till you discuss
Discuss with the group, Provost.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So 15 minutes. Thank you. Okay, then I think everybody's back in position. We'll go back to Councillor Kerr, who asked for the brief stoppage to discuss with his group. Councillor Bissett.
Okay, thank you, Provost. We discussed the motion, and there is a great level of detail in the standing orders, as you know, and any changes, significant changes, will have an impact on the council. And we feel there's a level of detail in there that needs further discussion. And we wondered if, without having a formal amendment, I just wondered if we could get agreement to continue this item, and we can meet with Colin. Perhaps the group leaders can meet with Colin, and Colin can meet with the groups as well to further discuss this, and then the group leaders could meet, and then we can try and reach some agreement before it comes back. So that's where we are just now. We think it's probably prudent to try and sharpen up the document and tailor it a wee bit better. That we think that continue it would be better. So I'm not for moving its amendment, but I'm just seeking if we can get agreement on that first.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Bissett. That simplifies your issue. I'll go back to the leader of the council, and then I'll come to Councillor Kerr. Councillor Meikle-John, you've heard what Councillor Bissett has said. He feels that we require more time.
Labour Group had as much time as we did, Provost, so yeah, I'm not very sure I quite get that. But what I would say is okay if we look at the standing orders, but just ask if we can agree the virtual meetings protocol, just so that we can regularise things for going forward, so that we can go on with that rather than leave that to coming back to a future meeting. But the rest of the standing orders, if we wish to continue for further discussion, then fair enough. Well, I think unless Councillor Bissett's not agreeing to what's statutory, I would have thought that would have been something that, you know, around the changes that have come in as part of the changes in planning and the code of conduct.
I'll come back to you, Councillor Bissett. You've heard what Councillor Meikle-John said.
I think anything that's statutory, of course, we would agree with, but in the virtual meetings, I don't see a problem with that. But perhaps maybe, so we'll wait and see if Councillor Kerr wants to continue or not. I don't know, but the proposal is to try and continue this, Provost, for a bit more discussion, because I think it's so important.
Okay then, but you'd be agreeing to the virtual meetings?
I don't think there's a problem with that at all.
Okay. Councillor Kerr, you've heard what the leader and Councillor Bissett has said. How does you and your group feel about this? Would you be happy for a continuation, but agreeing to the virtual meetings at this stage?
We're content to agree the statutory conditions, Provost, and the virtual meeting, virtual meetings, and I think it's a sensible thing to do, to continue it, as it is important going forward.
Okay, thanks for that. I see we've got a hand up here. It's Councillor Goldie. Councillor Goldie.
Provost, as an independent like yourself, I think it's important that you and I have always valued the fact that I take this term, and I hope nobody's going to go upset about it, but the little guy's got a chance to fight against the big guy. And I think that letting delegations come forward is, if you stop a delegation, I think it gives somebody against that. If you've got a big developer and the little guy there, or somebody that's not got a business, I think if you stop a delegation, you weigh the balance against the ordinary guy in the street, if you want to call it that. So even though you want to continue this, if that's what council agrees, I would ask that we accept that we should not stop delegations, and we should allow delegations to come forward, because that's the name of the game. You know, I think it's to be fair to everyone, and I didn't see any reason why we should stop delegations.
Okay. I think that we get. I think that Councillor Goldie will take part of the further considerations, and I'm sure that Councillor Bissett and Councillor Kerr would agree as well. We're no cherry pick. We're no cherry picking.
With respect, Provost, but we've just already agreed to one other thing. So
yeah, I can
Provost,
understand.
that could be agreed today, Provost.
Okay, I'm going to Councillor Murtagh. Councillor Murtagh.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe clarification can be given on that point, but effectively what I think Councillor Gold, I'm not trying to misrepresent you, but it is to continue the status quo, which is in effect what would happen anyway if we continued the matter. So I think that you know, if it is going to come back, the thing I probably wanted to ask, and I asked this in review of the first motion on the agenda that we had today, and the welcome unanimity that came from that, is that Councillor Meikle-John moved two particular parts which would be consistent with what we all agreed to at the beginning, and that was in terms of the diversity and equality issues for standing and indeed for language. I don't see any reason why they couldn't be agreed as part of that, because they would be consistent with what we've already agreed today. Although I haven't spoken with my group about that, because we're obviously going to have an amendment, I wouldn't see that there would be any reason for us not to include those. I don't know what Councillor Bissett thinks about that, or Councillor Kerr.
Okay, well, I think we're going to bring Councillor Alexander in at this stage. He's been put his hand up for a while. Councillor Alexander.
Councillor Alexander's on mute, Provost.
Yes, you're mute, David. You're still mute, David. Okay. Right, we'll go back to Councillor Gardner at this stage then, until we try and get David in. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Provost. I just want to raise a small concern I've got here. Now, both the Conservative and Labour group leaders have stated how important an agenda item this is, but yet they've not had time to look at this prior to this meeting. Neither have brought forward an amendment, which is not rare with the Conservative group. I believe they've only brought one amendment forward in my time here. So I find this quite surprising, Provost, that they haven't had time. They're now looking for a continuation of this. They keep talking about responsibility and being able to do the job, yet this is what we're left with.
Okay, thanks for your comment. Councillor Alexander, I believe you can get in now, and we'll come back to Councillor Murtagh's question to Councillor Bissett after that. Councillor Alexander.
Okay, thanks very much, Provost. I was going to make the same point as Councillor Gardner in that one. And it's a sense that you know, we're seeing time after time Labour and Tory waiting for the SNP response to a report or proposal, and then coming back with their own. Can we get a wee bit of originality and a wee bit of consistency in terms of putting forward proposals for these two groups?
Okay, thanks for that. I think the situation is clear for me, is that myself as well. And the motion that was put forward was on the screen, so everybody should have an opportunity to digest. Okay, we're going now. Councillor Murtagh, you had a question for Councillor Bissett. Could you maybe give us that again, because obviously we've spoken to 3 people since then.
Sorry, no problem. It was just purely that you know, Councillor Bissett has asked for a continuation of the matter, and that would continue the status quo for you know, some other matters. But there was a specific parts to the motion which Councillor Meikle-John outlaid about not standing as a presumption. People are still obviously welcome to stand if they wish to, but from a disability point of view, and also about the equalities language, which would be consistent with the Standards Commission and what we've already agreed to be our policy earlier in this meeting. So I just felt that wouldn't necessarily need to come back. We could potentially just agree that today, because we've essentially agreed, I think, the principles of that earlier in this meeting. So could they include it? Could they accept those points? If we're having to accept the statutory things, because we will have to accept some statutory things, can we accept those points as well?
Okay, I'll go back to Councillor Bissett and then Councillor Kerr in relation to what Councillor Murtagh said there. Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Provost. I think what Councillor Murtagh said is sort of fairly obvious, but I really don't want to sort of get to the stage where we're sort of dealing with every item that we've discussed. I would prefer just let's go for a continuation. Let's have a detailed discussion. It's so important. It's nothing to do with not having read it. We've read it, but on the day, you do realise that things come out and you think, oh, well, we maybe should go into a bit more detail on that. And there's nothing wrong with closer scrutiny with such an important document. So I think I'd just like to continue the document, continue it to another meeting, and hopefully we get agreement on that just now, Provost, to save any more time.
Okay, thank you for that. You've simplified your position. Councillor Kerr, are you the same position?
Aye.
Okay, thank you for that. I believe Councillor Nimmo wanted in.
Yeah, just a quick point, Provost, if I can. I don't really understand why the SNP are that surprised that we've asked for a continuation. Now, the SNP and officers have brought forward an 870-page agenda for yesterday's meeting and today's. Now, quite simply, we could ask for a continuation on any number of items on this agenda because they are important, and it's important that we get to the bottom of the issues involved. I'm not concerned about asking for continuations. I think that in some cases that's the appropriate way to deal with things, just so that we can get to the bottom of the items, because there's that much information contained on the agenda. It doesn't help, Provost.
Okay, thank you for your input, Councillor Nimmo. Councillor Meikle-John, you've heard the sort of discussions that's been ongoing. Councillor Bissett and Councillor Kerr both believe that a continuation would still be appropriate, but taking into account what you said regarding the habitual situation. Are you agreeing to this?
Provost, I want to address the comments made just by Councillor Nimmo there. You know, that's the job. That if we're given the papers, we're given the papers. And to be fair, some of his group asked for things to be continued the last time and brought back to this meeting. So there are additional items on the agenda, and it's a time of year where there are some big substantive reports that have come forward. So I'm sorry, you guys have had exactly the same time as the rest of us to look at the various papers before us. And I'm not actually understanding what the issue is with around the standing orders, because nobody's come forward and say actually we didn't agree with that, or that's what we want to have more discussion on. Councillor Murtagh's right. Something as simple as not standing to speak to meetings, is something that could quite easily be agreed and very simply agreed. Similarly, I get a feeling that around the deputations that there's probably is reasonable unanimity across the board in relation to that, because I've got a feeling that people are quite content with that rather than moving to hearings, but for all the reasons that Councillor Goldie actually explained. So if there are things that we want to continue, and one of them was around the motions and amendments given prior notice, that's already acknowledged there. So I'm not really very sure quite why, and it could well just be it's a further obstructions yet again and trying to delay things going forward. But there's very simple things in here that I think it seems petty not to just agree and move on. And this council has a reputation now of no taking decisions, and that is something that is really quite frustrating. But for me, but also the public are starting to see that. I don't want to have to go into a ditch and push it to an amendment. From the point of view of actually having a continuation. But I just want to mark the point that this is becoming silly, it's becoming a farce, the way we go about our business. We need to actually just step up to the mark and do the job we were actually put here to do. If we want a continuation, then I really do hope there's something that is going to be brought forward by way of proper proposals, and you know, recognise that, you know, we really should be moving on from this. And I really do dread now going to the next two items, which I suspect it's going to be the same continuation, and not moving on. I'm not going to push it to an amendment, but I'm really, really disappointed, Provost, in the way that this council's doing its business.
Okay then,
Councillor Murphy's got a question.
yes, just before we bring in Councillor Murtagh for a question, I'm going to go to Mr Moody, just to clarify. Councillor Goldie, you spoke, but is it a question?
No, I was going to move that we go to a vote,
Just now,
Provost.
I'll come back to you because there are people in front of you. Councillor Murtagh's next, but we're going to Mr Moody first, just to get some legal clarification. Thank you.
Provost, I think it's maybe helpful just to clarify what I believe to be the emerging position from the council in the discussion. And I think that is a general agreement at this stage to agree the virtual meetings protocol, to agree the change set out in paragraph 4.6 of the report, which is the one required by the new revised code of conduct, but for the rest of the position to continue the matter for further discussion and to bring a further report back to a future meeting of council.
Okay then, go back to Councillor Murtagh. You got a question?
Yeah, and it's just sort of provide some legal clarity, so I'm grateful to Colin for coming in with that summary. I suppose what it is, and I'm meaning this genuinely, colleagues, is that it was discussed that the Equalities Act duty, so the 2010 Equalities Act and the protected characteristics contained within that, this duty applies to every function of the council, and so clearly applies to decision-making functions and all policies and practices of the council. I would see that to include standing orders. And given that disability is recognised as a protected characteristic, my opinion, and I would ask the question of Colin, is does it not then fall on us to amend our standing orders to be in line with that? And that's all that's simply being asked in the two parts, both particularly for the standing, but also that we reflect on affirming about the protected characteristics. And as Councillor Mickeljohn says, so it's whether Colin can give some clarity that to me seems to be actually a legal duty in the same way that amending for the statutory stuff does. Don't see why that should be controversial.
Thanks for your question. Mr Moody, would you like to respond?
Provost, could I simply ask?
No, excuse me, Councillor Goldie. Councillor Murtagh's asked a question. His question's only at this time because Councillor Mickeljohn has already wound up. Mr Moody is answering the question for Councillor Murtagh at this stage. Mr Moody.
Thank you, Provost. And I think it's maybe worth reminding members of the council that you, Provost, have in an early stage of holding the role of Provost issued guidance to all members to say that you would not require any member to stand during the course of the meeting. And it would only be during council meetings that practice had been in place. At committee meetings, there was no practice or expectation that anyone stood. So I think the position as it stands at the moment with the status quo is that ruling is in place. I think there isn't then the pressing need to introduce the position now, because any risk in relation to an Equality Act issue has been adequately mitigated by the ruling taken by the Provost just now.
Can I come back on that?
My assessment of the position as it stands in relation to the particular issue Councillor Murtagh raises.
From a legal standpoint, however, and I wish the Provost all good health and well-being as always, and to all members. However, that's a suspension of our rules and our process. That's a suspension which I'm very grateful that the Provost has made. However, in our actual published rules, our process says this is what we should do. That can be revoked at any time And that's clear within standing orders that the Provost has the ability to do that. And so what is asking for is not, the Equality Act does not rely on people to have to ask for a dispensation or for somebody to benevolently give it. It's a legal right. And that's, to me, that has to be reflected in our actual processes. And if we're serious about actually practicing what we preach in the first motion, then what I cannot understand why that wouldn't be agreed to. It's beyond me. I suppose ask Colin to give an opinion on that. If it's a suspension of process, surely it's still a rule in there.
Okay, you're very clear there, Mr. Moody.
Provost, if I could observe perhaps that I maybe take a more optimistic view on the longevity of your role as Provost, and I think it's unlikely that there's any risk you're going to revoke that particular ruling that you've given thus far. And indeed, we're meeting remotely at the moment, and there isn't yet in position a plan for a physical meeting of the Council, which is a further mitigation of any risk that may arise from the issue, which is very properly identified by Councillor Murtagh. We will have an opportunity, I think, in the discussions to reflect on all of those issues, and a report will be brought back to Council. I've no doubt that we'll consider those issues and make appropriate recommendations.
Okay, I'm going back. Councillor Goldie, it's a question only at this stage because the leader is already wound up. A question?
Well, I've not got a question anymore.
Well,
Provost,
you've not got a question,
No,
Councillor Goldie. Have you not got a question? No, have you not got a question? Mr. Moody, we've already wound up here. So
I was just going to say, Provost, that I have to. I was going to say,
Councillor Goldie, we're moving on. You had an opportunity. You haven't got a question. You said so. We're moving on. We've got quite a lengthy debates to come yet. So we've had a motion moved and seconded. We've had introductions from the Councillor Bissett and the Labour Group and Councillor Kerr in relation to the continuation. I would just like to clarify exactly where we are, and then we can agree or disagree. Thank you.
Provost, as I understand the situation, there is now general agreement that the Council will agree the virtual meetings protocol, will agree the change set out in paragraph 4.6, which is the change to Standing Order 38, necessitated by the revised Code of Conduct. But so far as the rest of the Standing Orders review is concerned, we'll continue that to a later meeting to allow for discussions to take place with elected members.
Okay, is everybody agreed?
Agreed. Councillor Goldie has just left the meeting, so he's not agreed, obviously.
Well, he might be aggrieved. He might not have agreed, but he might be aggrieved. Okay, thank you for that. That takes us now to item 16 on your agenda, and it is a contract standing orders review. And Ian Henderson will summarise the report and the recommendations. It's pages 436 to 463, and a welcome to you, Mr. Henderson.
Thank you very much, Provost, and good afternoon, everyone. The revised contract standing orders are appended to the report, and the recommendation you will note is that Council approves their adoption. Just by way of background, the orders are there to ensure that there are uniform and compliant contracting procedures across the Council. The current orders date back to 2016 and are due to be updated to reflect developments in procurement. And I think, as you'll all appreciate, the main revisal in that regard is to reflect that the UK has left the European Union. Recommendations were made in the annual audit report action plan, and they've also been addressed with an effort to provide greater clarity on officers' roles and responsibilities, and in particular in relation to contract management and monitoring. No doubt of most significance to members are the paragraphs numbered 4.2 to 4.7, and they set out proposed changes in relation to the involvement of members in the procurement process. Again, by way of background, as matters presently sit, members of the executive receive a periodic contract list of proposed contract awards over £500,000. In response to that, a member of the executive can call any item on that list to executive for consideration. As noted at paragraph 4.2, at that stage in the procurement journey, as we would say, when the procurement exercise has essentially been completed subject to final award, the scope for members to influence the procurement is somewhat limited. At that stage, the executive can agree with the award or decide not to make an award and essentially abandon the procurement. Accordingly, what we're proposing is that the revised orders allow member involvement be front-ended rather than at the end of the process. So you will note that it's proposed that all procurements with an estimated value of 7.5 million or above shall automatically be subject to a report to executive before the procurement process is even commenced. The report would cover matters such as the requirement for the goods, works or services, affordability, and I suppose quite crucially, the proposed procurement strategy. So this process and that reporting is referred to in the orders as the prior consideration process. For proposed procurements with an estimated value of greater than 500,000, there would still be a requirement for members of the executive to be given notice of these by way of a planned procurement bulletin. Members would then have 14 days before any procurement is started to approach the relevant chief officer for further information or clarification of the procurement if they consider that any of the planned procurements might be of significance. The chief officer would obviously give consideration to whether or not it would be appropriate to refer the matter to the executive for prior consideration. Again, this process would take place prior to the procurement exercise even commencing. In terms of some other mop-up matters, paragraph 4.6 provides for, as you might expect, situations of urgency where there would be a consultation process with the leader of the council, the leaders of the main opposition groups, and the chief governance officer. Paragraph 4.7 proposes that a chief officer may award a contract with a value of between 250,000 and 500,000 without the need to consult with the chief governance officer, as is currently the case. Paragraph 4.8 lists a number of other proposed revisals, such as specific reference in the orders to the Fair Work First guidance and climate and circular economy considerations. We've noted at paragraph 4.9 that there will require to be a short transition period that would be a period to allow the introduction of the new prior consideration process, given that there are live procurements currently underway, so there would still be a contract list given to the executive in the normal manner during that period. So thank you, Provost, and I'm happy to at least try to answer any of the questions that members might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson, for your summary. Councillor Bowes, are you coming in this one right away?
Yeah, I'm proposing. Thank you, Provost. Can I say that this ties in a little bit with an article at the Executive, which Councillor Nimmo had brought to it, and I'm pleased to see that the Fair Work First principles are going to be enshrined in this. There's an amount of technical changes in this report that have to happen, such as changing the advertising of contracts from the official journal of the European Union to the find a tender system. They will ultimately end up in the same place, which is Public Contracts Scotland. This, of course, is a result of Brexit. The significant changes have been in the pipeline, as Mr. Henderson has already said, for the last couple of years, and I welcome the changes that will allow earlier vision and input to tenders to elected members. To summarise the changes, I would advise it in bullet point form. The removal of the weekly contracts list, which we currently get, which comes after all the procurement exercise is completed. Notification and involvement of elected members prior to any council service going to procurement via a planned procurement bulletin. As Mr Henderson's already said, they will then have 14 days to speak to any head of service with regards to any project. Projects with a 4-year total of 7.5 million will be reported to the executive by the relevant chief officer with all relevant information to preceding the procurement process. As we have learned over the last 2 years, there are times when we need to expedite matters, and this will be done in consultation with the leader of the council, the leaders of the main opposition groups, and the chief governance officer. And an extension, again, as Mr Henderson has said, to the, as I would call it, the award approval levels of chief officers up to £500,000. These changes will ensure surety of spend, elected member input on the spend with the chief officers prior to processing to the procurement and protections as laid out in section 6 of the contract standing orders. Therefore, rather than the contracts list, when all the procurement procedure has completed, elected members will have a planned procurement bulletin prior to the procurement exercise. One thing, and for clarity, and because I know a number of members quite often look at the information bulletin, and for clarity, all delegated decisions for contracts over £10,000 will still be reported in the information bulletin at full council meetings. I move the recommendations in paragraph 2.1 to approve the revised standing contract orders. And as ever, thank Mr Henderson for his time and putting up with me when we had meeting, and of course his presentation on this. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your submission there, Councillor Bowes. You simplified the situation. It's a very important issue, and as you say, it's one that gets brought forward periodically with members, especially in the information bulletin, and it's the one that does need great scrutiny. Okay, have you got a second there, Councillor Bowes? Councillor Murtaugh?
I'm happy to formally second and reserve the right to come back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going straight to Councillor Bissett. Councillor Bissett, have you anything in relation to the motion that's just been moved and seconded?
No problem. I'd just like to thank Ian for that detailed report, and clearly the changes had to be made. It's coming away from the EU, and it's been about 2016 since it was refreshed, so it's welcome, and I'll also welcome the contracts at 5 million coming to the executive. I think Councillor Monroe had called in a couple of contracts for maybe closer scrutiny, and maybe that's what's pushed this along. So I'm grateful for her for doing that. But no issues on this at all, Provost, and accept the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I'll go straight to Councillor Kerr, speaking on behalf of his group.
Thanks, Provost. We welcome the report, and as Councillor Bissett says, it was, I don't know if it was all regarding this, but the contract that Councillor Monroe and one that I brought forward for a contract of £55 million, and it was just getting passed straight away. I felt that we as a council need to be clear that that's the right process we're doing, and getting explained to from the officers that there's a stringent process in place, but putting this first will really help elected members to understand the process. So really I appreciate the work that Ian's done, and quite glad to support the recommendations, Provost.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion moved and seconded. It's been agreed as well by the two leaders of both groups. Does anybody want in before we agree? Councillor Spears, did you want in here?
Yes.
Okay, I can't see, but I can hear you vaguely.
Well, it's just saying that it's for political groupings again. I'd imagine, Provost, yourself as an independent will wonder if we're going to have any say in this.
Okay, thanks for your input, sir. Okay, everybody agreed then?
Agreed.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, that takes us to item 17, financial regulations. Brian Smale will summarise the report and the recommendations contained within. It's pages 464 to 482 on your agenda. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Provost. There's a clear link with the previous item on the agenda, the contract standing orders, and indeed the documents listed also at the bottom of the first page of the report, page 465. It's important all these documents remain aligned and in sync, and that's what we're looking to achieve. The financial regulations are a very important component in the overall framework of financial control, and it's important that they are periodically reviewed, refreshed and updated. And as the report notes, this was last done in 2015, so such an update somewhat overdue, I would suggest. There has been a particular driver for this update in terms of recommendations made by our external auditors, EY, in the last round of financial accounts, and subsequently progress by the audit committee. Paragraph 4.4 lists in the bullets there the changes that relate to financial irregularity, and the next paragraph 4.5 notes the other changes, again a sequence of bullet points. Essentially, flowing from that, Provost, the Council is invited to approve the financial revision to the financial regulations as set out in the report and the appendix. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Brian, I don't know where you are, but you're looking very obtrusive there in that dark area.
Provost, I usually lurk in the shadows, so normal fare for me.
Fine, okay. Okay, who's going to be speaking on behalf of the administration for this? Councillor Meikle, John, thank you.
Thanks, Provost. I will be very brief. This is a technical report, but it's also a very, very important report. And as Brian has said, we've got some housekeeping in relation to some policies that are overdue, and it is right that we bring those forward at this time, particularly considering some of the comments from our
I've nailed the group leaders, so maybe it's not a bad thing to say.
Fraud and corruption.
First deputies.
Sorry, Cecil. Brian, we can hear you.
And indeed the whistleblowing policy, etc. We, having just reviewed our contract standing orders, this is very timely, and as Brian said, links quite clearly with that, but an updating of those and again regularising them with any changes that are relevant, particularly around our withdrawal from the EU. So on that, I'm happy to move the report as it has been presented.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bowes, are you going to second?
I am, Provost, and thank Brian for, because this again is something he's been working on for some time, much like Mr Henderson was with the last one. These have been in the pipeline for a little while, but I'm happy to second it.
I'll go quickly to Councillor Bissett. Councillor Bissett, on behalf of your group, what would you say? Would you be hopeful of supporting the recommendations contained here?
Yes, it is a very technical report. A report, as the leader said, very important though. But we certainly agree with the recommendations, Provost.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr?
Agree the recommendations, Provost.
Okay, we all agreed the recommendations then? Agreed? Well done. Thank you, and thank you, Mr Smale. Okay, then that takes us to, I believe, the last item on the agenda. Is future arrangements for council and committee meetings, pages 483 to 488. And the report is by Mr Brian Pirrie. Thank you, Brian.
Okay, thank you, and apologies for having my mic off earlier on in that previous item. Given it's the last item, I won't take too long. It's Council agreed on 29 September to introduce blended meetings as part of its move towards physical participation in meetings. We had 2 blended meetings in October and November of the Executive and Scrutiny Committee. Since then, we've met with elected members to discuss how they felt the meetings went. Generally, the feeling was they were positive, but there was some learning points for officers and for elected members. So having reflected on the outcome of the discussion with members, we're recommending that the Council continues with its cautious approach to the return to physical participation, and therefore recommending that we extend the trial programme to include the executives up to March next year and the Scrutiny Committee on the 27th of January. We're also took note of feedback during the workshops with members, and we'll be looking at whether there's scope to introduce a blended meeting for the Council's budget decision making on the 2nd of March. So those are the recommendations, but we also note that given the current public health situation, we retain the facility of the Chief Executive in consultation with the group leaders to revoke these procedures and just make sure every meeting is held remotely. So those are the basic recommendations, Convener, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that, Mr. Curry. Councillor Meikle-John.
Thank you, Provost. And again, I won't take up much of Council's time in relation to this because the report is relatively clear. I think while the Council has managed to transact its business reasonably well over the last few years, and as a result there has been a change and likely to continue to be a change in the future. What that might be and how remote meetings and blended meetings fit into Council business is still to be fully determined, and the proposal that's here before us is part of determining that going forward. We are going to be some time before we can get back to full physical meetings under the current circumstances, but it's also recognised that there's some business hasn't been able to be as transacted as in a quality way without having those physical opportunities, and politics is one of those where actually having some of those informal discussions in a face-to-face environment is one that's very helpful, and I do think that some of that has been lost over the last couple of years, the informal conversations that I know that I've not been able to have the same in meeting with James and Robert and indeed others. And as a result, communications, I think, has probably brought the Council to some of the challenges that face us right now. But notwithstanding that, safety has to be paramount, and that's why the proposed way forward to trial out the blended meetings to see if that's something that is going to be sustainable in the longer term, but would also be able to be managed within the current guidance. I think the fact that that there's the caveat of should public health advice change and things deteriorate, then the Chief Executive has the delegated authority in support of the group leaders to go back to full remote meetings should that be required. But until we fully test out formally the blended meetings, then we can't really take a full view on that. We only have a few meetings left. I think there's only something like 3 executives and potentially 2, possibly 3 full councils to fit in all of our business between now and the end of term. Full councils are challenging to do physically, but if we could do the budget meeting that way, then I think that would add some value to it, but recognise that some of the public health issues around will determine that for us. But I think being able to continue with the pilot and trial out the technology that we now have, and look at how that can be determined as part of our business in the way forward for the future is the right way to go. It's very similar to other councils, and they're taking a similar view of things right now. So I would move the report as it is and look forward to seeing the outcome of the pilots in due course.
Fine, thank you for that. Have you got a seconder for that motion? Somebody going to second that? It's only a report, but she's the leader's formally moved. Councillor Kerr, okay. Thank you. So, Councillor Bissett, Councillor Kerry, you happy with the report?
I'll form a second that.
Fine.
Okay, I'd just like to say that, you know, it's been astounding, the transformation digitally and how the council has managed to function over the past 2 years. It's been really quite remarkable, and I'd like to pay tribute to everybody involved. I think that we still need to adopt that cautious approach, and I think this report reflects that. It is indeed going to be cautious, and I attended one of the blended trials already, and I think the leader's right that, you know, you get a better idea and you can see the social cues easier, and you can sort of see the direction of travel, or if somebody wants a quiet word where you can make changes. I think it's easier to do that than it is on this type of forum, really. So certainly welcome it, and certainly respect everyone's views regarding how safe, staying safe, because the situation is fluid and we do have different variants come along. So respect everybody's views regarding staying safe, but adopt a cautious approach moving forward, Provost. Thank you. Accept the recommendations.
Okay, then we have everybody in agreement. Can we agree the report then? Agreed?
Agreed.
Now, before you go, Mr. Moody has got an announcement to make in relation to a special meeting of the council. Mr. Moody, I'll pass on to you.
Yes, thank you, Provost, and it maybe allows an opportunity to pass on some information before you wish everyone the best wishes for the festive season, in that I think we may be coming back together again before that time. Provost, I think you have kindly agreed that a special meeting can take place in the week prior to Christmas, scheduled for the 20th of December, which is the Monday. And the purpose of the special meeting is relating to the investment zone heads of terms, and the timing of that, I think, is pressing, which requires the meeting to be arranged on a special basis. It can't, I think, wait, as I understand it, until the next scheduled meeting of the council. And I don't know if that's maybe a point that the Chief Executive might want to say something around the business that needs to be transacted.
Okay, Mr. Laurie. Okay, Mr. Laurie.
Yes, thank you, Provost. So the work in the investment zone has been ongoing, as members know, for quite some time. We're hoping that it will be able to be signed off by the two governments on the 21st of December, and arrangements for that are being put in place. But clearly, it's important that the council has the opportunity to consider the heads of terms and agree them in advance. And I know that through discussions with group leaders, that all three group leaders are keen to get this over the line, and it would be a very positive thing for the council to achieve. So that's the reason for the meeting. The intention, I think, is to circulate an agenda tomorrow, which will set out the relevant report. What I would say is that in terms of the precise time when we as a council get hold of the final heads of terms, that is to a degree in the hands, to a very large degree in the hands of the UK and Scottish governments. So the actual heads of terms may be to follow, but the intention is that the agenda will be issued tomorrow. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, just to let you know what people have been asking about the time, there's an appointments committee in the morning, so we requested a time for 2:30 and hope that's going to suit everybody. Obviously, it's close to Christmas, but we want to get the business done, and there'll be an opportunity there for everybody to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, and I hope that Dennis is back by then. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.